This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
Being scrappy has been something that we remind ourselves, because it's easy to build empires and try to do things big, but we're using our knowledge, we're making mistakes, but we're making them really quickly and we're course correcting fast. Leading with courage is just reminding yourself and reminding the team that we have something that can help our consumers.
Man, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, I was introduced to my guest, and he was the CEO of Tom's Shoes. And at the time, I think this was like a devious way for me to get my sock company acquired by somebody. And again, if you don't know, that was a surprise. I got lots of little side projects, and one of them was a company called Sock Problems. And the idea is every sock's a different problem in the world. And I kind of realized I am not the best person to run this business. And I had met Magnus. I forget if Blake who even introduced us? Do you remember?
You know, I think Jeff Cottrell might have been the culprit here.
I think you're right. It wasn't Blake.
Jeff and I worked together at Converse back in the day, and we've stayed in contact. And I believe he made the introduction.
You know, Jeff is a 2-time guest to the podcast, so now you're going to have one under your belt. Jeff has one of my absolute favorite lines that he shared on the show. So first of all, we're both giving shouts out to Jeff. What's up, Jeff Cottrell? Second, my favorite line is, he's like, here's how the chapter ends. You're going to get fired for something. Get fired for the thing you want to get fired for. Take the cut. Take the shot. Take the shot. Don't get fired for something that you actually don't actually take action on it. And gosh, this must have been Magnus. Like, we're on like episode 250 here. That might have been in the first 50. I still hold that moment true and dear. And I'm like, if I'm with a client, it's hard to say what needs to be said. Your courage business. Say it. Say the hard thing. Now you've seen some rooms, man. You've seen some rooms.
I have. And just on Jeff, like, I worked with Jeff for quite a bit of time, and I watched and I studied Jeff, and we haven't worked together in a while, but I'll put Jeff up there against any marketer in this country. He is just world-class, and he has a ability to market to America like no one I've ever seen. And that's a skill. And, you know, both Jeff and I have seen a lot of different boardrooms over the years, but shout out to Jeff. It's a brilliant marketer.
I'm glad he brought us together, man. And I don't know if you want to, where I was going to start was where we met. I believe you joined Tom's at 2020. This is the CEO. Right. What a great time to join the company.
Yeah, it was quite the ride. And you know, I've been watching Tom's, the footwear company, closely for many years as a competitor. And I was always fascinated that, you know, Blake Mikowski, an outsider coming into this very saturated industry and making an impact immediately. And Blake, you know, with a couple of interns early on, you know, grew Tom's from a, you know, an idea in an apartment in Santa Monica to a $500 million company in 6 years. I'd never seen anything like it. And he did that with a bunch of interns with zero experience in footwear. So I was watching very closely. I was at Converse at the time, and just his ability to land. And not only that, Blake really introduced philanthropy to corporate America in a new way that hadn't been seen before. So I was always in awe, and I had conversations with Blake throughout the years, but when the new ownership came on board late 2019, I joined as the CEO. I had the opportunity to have quite a bit of handover with Blake, because there's one thing coming in with new ideas to a company, but you know, those are meaningless unless you fully understand where the brand was built, how it was built, and you know, hear it straight from the horse's mouth. And I'm forever grateful for Blake to give it that he gave me that time to fully understand the journey he'd been on and how I can take the baton and take this to the next level. So that was great. And I spent a good 5 years with Tom's before I decided to leave last summer. And you said it, what a ride. Spring, I joined in January 2020, and like timing is everything, as they say. And we had a couple of months as a new leadership team to make some adjustments to the organization. We were looking at, how do we evolve and how do we strategically iterate and extend our product line while keeping the core intact. We were looking at kind of this chapter 2 on the giving and how do we make that meaningful for today's consumer. So we got we got a pretty good start. And then I remember sitting in my office, and I had quite a bit of factory partners, most of them from China over, and people were talking about this flu. And all I could think about was the bird flu and the swine flu. And I've been through all of them. And I was thinking maybe this is a disruption that I don't need. It might set us back a couple of weeks here. And I thought about this as, a disruption, on the Asian side, not in the US. And before I knew it, I was on the 405 freeway back home, and I was the only one on the freeway. And I believe that was March 22nd, 2020 or something. And I was thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to operate this company in somewhat of a turnaround situation, working from home for a couple of weeks? That's going to set us back. And little did I know that this went on for years. And so yeah, that was my introduction, and it was a fun start.
Yeah, I do my best to stay out of the way on these shows and just sort of like, let's keep moving us down the field and learning about you. But I there are some soapbox moments here, and this is a soapbox moment. Like, it's funny studying the concept of courage. Nobody gets a say on change. Like you clearly didn't vote for a pandemic, right? Or whatever this flu is going to be. But what I've learned is that when change drives you, that is an act of resilience. Like how you respond to when change, that's a very different muscle than when you drive change muscle, which is the courage muscle. Like, again, change is happening whether you like it or not. Do you even feel like you got a fair shake to be a courageous leader, or do you feel like you had to like jump immediately into resilience mode?
I think I got a fair shot at it. And I was thrown in with the wolves from day one, right? And my whole career I've been watching, from a young 20-something in a sales force. I spent my entire career watching leaders, what to do and what not to do. And in certain cases, you learn more from watching people that you disagree with and you do not respect. That's always been my case. And, the approach I took early on in COVID is acting with a sense of urgency and full transparency. So, again, we had half of our business was direct to consumers through toms.com, and the other half was wholesale. And within a couple of weeks, half of our order book was gone on the wholesale side. We offset actually some or most of that with a tremendous increase in our D2C business. But the reason I'm bringing that up is operating with courage or operating with transparency. I felt the need to over communicate with our factory partners. And without, you have a footwear company, but without your factory partners, you have nothing. And, nobody knew the extent of what this is going to be, but I felt necessary that we stayed, normally you unless you're in product development per se, you don't spend every week talking to your factory partners, but we made it a point to over communicate and with full transparency what was going on so they can plan on their side. And I'll tell you, that helped us years afterwards, building that relationship, operating with transparency, and some might say courage, right? Because it's hard to give people bad news. So that was something that I've been watching, others do, but I felt like operate with full transparency, and not only with our factory partners, with the entire Tom's team at the time was critical, and you couldn't do that in person. So we had, I believe, at one point, I made a mini podcast from my house to make sure that the entire team knew what was going on at all times, because, it's easy to forget what that, you think everybody else knows. So we made it a point to operate with full transparency and over communicate with people. And that's always served me well. So But I make it sound like it was easy. It wasn't. But I think that was an approach that I took early on. My goodness, because we're not together. Nobody had any. Today, it's kind of the norm. Like you operate, via Zoom or whatever operating system you use. But back then, it was. I couldn't. It took me a couple of days to figure out to be comfortable in front of a camera, because that's not every day. Now that's kind of par for the course. But back then, it was something different for sure.
Yeah, Magnus, one of the things I've really enjoyed about our conversations is you're not like your typical, I have a vision in my mind when I think of typical CEO. Maybe that's maybe this says more about me than anybody else, but like maybe my time in New York City is showing, right? But like when I think about you, it isn't just transparency or courage, it's also creativity. Like I feel like you bring a level of creativity that's refreshing, and the amount of times I've tried to describe myself, like I don't see myself as like a business guy, and I don't see myself as a creative. I see myself as a creative business guy. And I think that's sort of the special sauce, is that when you realize I'm in the creative business, and I want C-suites to realize what creativity can do. Do you see yourself as like a creative leader?
Not really. But the way I lead though, what you see is what you get. And, to me, authenticity in leadership is everything. I've been to enough multinational companies that we do, what is it called? It's called the Myers-Briggs test, and you do a lot of personality tests. And there's one in particular where your true self meets your work self. And I've seen people where the circle of, being you and your authentic self and how you show up in the workplace are so far apart. And I've seen these people and there is very little authenticity. They put up a show. It's almost they show up for a movie set or something and act like a leader or act like a manager. I pride myself, my two circles are not concentric, they're overlapping. What you see is what you get. And that's how I lead. Like I operate with authenticity. I operate with honesty, and I over communicate. And if you don't like it, that's fine. But some of the things that I've always done is, any ideas in an organization can come from any level. And it might be frustrating to work with me sometimes because of that, because I don't see levels. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about titles. It's never been important to me. A good idea or an initiative can come from anybody. And, we all read business book about, fun stories like that, but I truly believe it, and for me, it's always about how do you utilize the full brain power of the entire organization. And if you can't do that, and if you only rely on a few people and you only surround yourself with people that, agree with you in a leadership role, you're only going to be so successful. So, and the other thing that I try to do, everybody comes to work, want to do good. And, we all hire adults. This is not a daycare center when you operate. So treating people like adults and really listening to them and making sure that everybody is heard. Not everybody's going to make that decision, but for me, it's so important to have the entire organization engaged and utilizing their skill sets and their knowledge and their ideas. I think that's the only way to run a successful company. That's kind of has been my approach. I don't have a full outline plan for that, but that's how I operate.
You mean you didn't bring a PowerPoint presentation to present today on your leadership style?
And I actually made it a point at Tom's. I don't think I had one PowerPoint presentation during my 5 years, with the exception of board meetings. But to the team, they don't want to see a slide. They don't want to hear me talk. So I made it a point, and I think I successfully achieved that goal, to not have one slide up in front of the team.
You had mentioned how people, they want to do good. They want to do well. And this is an interesting one at Tom's, right? You're navigating a pandemic. You're also navigating a 1-for-1 model, which was groundbreaking at the time. But from what I remember from some of our conversations, there's some hidden complexities there on like how to make the math work, right? As you're trying to grow a business. And I'll throw one more in here too. And I think we're both aligned on this, that like, I mean, there's nothing I don't like. I never worked with Blake, but I love Blake. I love what Blake's doing now. I love what Blake's trying to launch, which I'm not going to share right now. What's not to like about Blake? But from your lens, there's probably complexities with a founder that's an evangelist as a third part of that stool that you're like, hey, Blake, you brought me in to do this. So talk me through some of the complexities you felt looking at the one-to-one model, when you realized there was complexities, and then also having a leader like Blake who was still kind of the face of the brand.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think starting with the topic of 1-for-1, like I said, it was a groundbreaking idea, and it changed the way corporate America operates. And it worked really well when the business was growing at double digits, when you had one shoe that had incredible margins and the company was fairly small. Fast forward to 2020, the brand was struggling a little bit. The Icon, the Alpargata, the core canvas shoe that people know and love had been in decline for several years, right? And we managed to replace that with new product introductions, but not at the same margin levels. And when you're selling millions of shoes and you got to give away millions of shoes, which is the most noble thing ever. And we ended up giving away over 100 million pairs of shoes, which is just mind-boggling, right? But what on the operational side of that, it became incredibly complex. We had a separate supply chain just managing the giving side. We had 5 different factory partners. We had multiple organizations, and we came to a point where it became it was not sustainable. It got so expensive, so it was risking taking us out of the business. So what we did early on, and with the guidance of Blake, and we were struggling a little bit with the messaging, because 1-for-1 is such a powerful tagline, and it just explains everything you do, right? So replacing that was incredibly hard. However, we felt like the spirit of this is you buy Toms, and in return, the brand will do something good. So we simplified the model, and we stopped doing the 1-for-1 giving a shoe. But every time somebody bought something from Tom's, a third of our profits went to charities. And after a couple of trial and errors, we ended up in the mental health space and really, funded organizations, grassroots organizations that were helping people that didn't have access to mental health. And we were maybe a little early with that. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and talking about mental health back in the day was, kind of a taboo, right? And over time here, it's become more mainstream, and people feel much more comfortable talking about it. And if you guys follow Blake, on Instagram right now, he is doing a phenomenal job of demystifying mental health and his own struggles. And he is just such a likable guy, and is doing such a good job talking about mental health. And he's taken all the stigma away. So, we were on that same path, and I think we did a pretty good job at the end. And we funded a lot of underprivileged kids and gave them access to mental health. And so that was kind of the how we ended up there. There was a lot of questions from the consumer if we were given, and, if we were honest about it. And, full disclosure, we're giving a third of our profits to grassroots organization. And I've now been away for about a year, and I think they're still honoring that and still doing the same thing. I think they've shifted even more to a kids focus and are helping kids. But back to Blake, like I said, Blake and I had a great transition, and Blake and I have stayed in contact, and who knows, we might be up to something together here in the near future again. So, he is one of those few entrepreneurs, man. There's not that many of them. Like, you see, these charismatic entrepreneurs. But to answer your question, after Blake left in late 2019, what we lost was a megaphone. Blake had access to media, PR. He was on multiple times on Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel. And that is something that, we struggle a little bit with, right? It's hard when you have that natural person that's connected with the brand. And without him, you have to pay for all that stuff, and you're not getting it, the same type of singularity message out there like you did with Blake. So that took us a little bit of time, but we found different ways of doing that. But definitely, a founder that is so associated with a brand like Tom's, was not easy.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of like, oh, it's Blake from Tom's.
Yeah.
Right. Versus, and you chop that off, but also, wow. I mean, this is courageousness, right? This is courageousness to figure out. And you talk about fear. I could understand how hard that must be to be like, the model doesn't work. Like, in this world with social media, I can only imagine the comments section, right? Moving from 1-to-1, right? Even to saying, hey, a third of our profits are going to grassroots causes. Like, you can still wear good and do good things. One of my favorite quotes, Magnus, is Arthur Schopenhauer. It's like a 17th century philosopher, German philosopher. And I love it because it still holds true today. And he said, all truth passes through 3 phases. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. Third, it's deemed self-evident. And it's like, you think about that like through the lens of people just don't like change. We're not wired for change. And so if you love Tom's, now Blake is kind of out, and one give one, get one's kind of out. I could see what a hard job it was for you and the team to like keep it going down this new path.
Yeah, I know it definitely was a challenge. And we're talking about making these changes during, a once in a lifetime pandemic, followed up by supply chain disruptions like I've never seen. And I was looking at myself and I was feeling sorry for myself, but I was just reminding, we're not going through this alone. Every single company in America or around the world is going through the same things. But sometimes when you sit there and we were actually losing, I got to a point where we couldn't ship, we couldn't make product. Factories were closed all over Asia, and we managed to get a couple of containers out. And I got a message saying that the container that we had shipped actually fell overboard in the Sea of Japan. It's kind of a low point. I'll never forget that one. So, it all worked out at the end, and it was all great. And I think Tom's is in a really good place now. And I'm a big supporter of watching them from the sidelines, in the footwear industry. But, what I haven't been a part of is they're going through the uncertainties of tariffs right now is tough.
So you're a year out since you've been there. You got your hands in a bunch of other things. Let's talk about leadership first, and then I want to get to what you're working on if you're cool with it. So like you talked about this already. I love how you said, look, we all kind of have a you learn what to do by watching what not to do list, right? Like on the leaders, like, wow, I'm never going to do that if I'm in the chair. But let's talk about the positive. Like, give me 2 leaders that you've worked with. And by the way, could have been a peer. Doesn't mean like I think we all have the capacity to lead. Could have been a peer. Could have been someone you worked for. Give me 2 leaders that you haven't mentioned that you're like, wow, these people really kind of inspired me or showed me the way, or I learned something new from them.
Yeah, there's a gentleman by the name of Michael Spillane, Boston, born and bred, Southie, that was the CEO for Tom's for many years. And I was watching him very closely because he was a man of, he was probably always showed up as the smartest man in the room, but you'd never know it. He was not leading by speaking the most. He was always sitting back, listening, soft-spoken gentleman. But oh my goodness, I thought early on in my career, leadership was leading and always be upfront and I'd never seen anybody leading like that. And, one of the things that I took from him was he never showed up with a presentation. He always walked up, spoke from his heart. He kept it sweet. He kept it short. Early on in my Converse career, we were on with accounts and I was getting long-winded and he just shut me down in the nicest possible way. And what I took away from him was get to the goddamn point. We all use corporate jargon and we make things much more complicated than they need to be. And I love Spillane for that because he is straight to the point. He can simplify things like I've never seen before. So I'll use Michael Spillane. I think Michael Spillane is now, after a long, successful career as I think number 2 at Nike for a long time, is now with Sam Adams beer company, which is great. So I stay in contact with him, but he's a different type of leader. The other one that I'll throw out there is Dave Powers at Deckers. I had the pleasure of working with Dave at Converse. He was out heading up retail at the time, and then he ended up as the CEO for Deckers, and he was leading Deckers through the most successful years, I've ever seen, right? The stock didn't double, but it probably quadrupled a couple of times during his leadership. But Dave is another one that I watched, and I'd seen him as a peer in my early days at Converse, but I worked for him over at Deckers, and Dave led without any ego. I've never seen anything like it. So he was also a very different leader than your traditional leader. Watching, listening, leading with his heart, I'd say empowering his people. Because I tell you, I've seen the other side when a leader is so dominant and upfront and can paralyze an entire leadership team. And as a result, you're paralyzing the entire organization, where one person believes he's better than anybody and can do anybody else's job better. And the end result of that is nothing gets done and people are just paralyzed. So I've seen it both. I'll bring Michael Spillane and I'll do Dave Powers as two leaders that I watched later in my career, but I took a lot from how to lead, because you don't always have to be upfront. It's okay. Everybody has an ego, but the way they approached their leadership style, I took away from that, and I used that quite a bit at Tom's.
All right, we're gonna take the way back machine ride. So we're gonna get our time machine, go backwards, and then we're gonna end by going forwards to what you're working on now. But when you see the name Magnus Wedhammar, I mean, nothing says that feels like in Ohio, like Akron, Ohio, or am I getting this right? No, wait a minute, maybe not from America. So give me let's talk about where you grew up, and then we don't have to like stay here forever, right? Get to the point, as you said. But as the rock skipped across the pond, give me a little bit of how you started, and are you surprised about the journey where it took you?
Yeah, this was not part of the plan. Sitting in Southern California or in Santa Barbara, California, that was never part of my plan. I grew up, born and raised outside of Stockholm, Sweden. Some people think I look like a Viking, or later now with my beard being white, more like Santa Claus. But yeah, so grew up and spent most of my time on the basketball court. I was an aspiring basketball player, and I played basketball to my early 20s until I realized I wasn't good enough to make it over here. And there was professional basketball in Europe at the time, but it's nothing like it is today, right? I like it to Semi-Pro, the movie with Will Ferrell. That was kind of the level I played. I loved it, and it was great, and it formed my life. And just being in a team and operating as a team has taught me a lot about leadership and being part of a team. And so that's where I grew up, Sweden. And again, cultures are different, but I feel like I have been Americanized over the years, but I still keep the core of my Swedishness, so to speak. And it comes back to simplicity and being direct and being honest. And, maybe that was my upbringing with my parents, but I think it's also a very Swedish trait, straight to the point.
What age did you pop over here?
I moved around quite a bit. My first stop was in London. I went to hotel management school in London, and that was my path. I loved the hotel industry. But because I played basketball, I got connected with Nike. And long story short, I ended up with Nike in 1995. And I spent a good 20 years with the Nike family, and 10 of those with Nike and the other 10 with Converse. So my journey was, I started my career with Nike Sweden. I moved to Amsterdam, the European headquarters, and then I ended up in Beaverton. So I saw the full gamut of Nike, from sitting in a sales office with two people in it to end up in the Mia Hamm building in Beaverton, where today I believe there's 6,000 or 7,000 people sitting over there. So I saw it all, from footwear, apparel to equipment. But I am forever grateful for my experience with Nike. What you learn in a company like that is hard to get, from any education, right? So, and you work with a lot of type A personalities, a lot of smart people. And like I said, I learned a lot what to do and what not to do, watching leaders. But overall, that has shaped and formed my career And I decided to leave. I was with Converse for about 10 years, and I was the vice president for Chuck Taylor, which is still to this day the largest footwear franchise in the world with lots of history, right? And when I got to Converse back in 2005, it was about $800 million in size. So when I left, we were over $3 billion. And, we were operating back in the day like a little startup mentality. I thought 800 million at the time was nothing, because I came from a company with about 30 billion, right? We were somewhat of the little stepchild there when I got there. But by the time I left, we were delivering over $500 million in EBITDA, and Nike was paying attention. And for all the good things about Nike, but any big corporation, it becomes cumbersome and slow moving. And I was craving a little more entrepreneurship. And I tell you, one of the things that and sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, right? But I'd never seen a down quarter in my first 20 years working for Nike. I'd only seen success. And people that work with you and for you think they're invincible. Like when things go good, and they'd gone really, really good for about 20 years. And I was kind of craving that entrepreneurship. So don't quote me on this, but I think in 2015, I decided to make a move and join the Wolverine Corporation. They had a pretty big office in Boston, and they were looking for somebody to run their Sperry Topsider, creation. So I jumped ship in 2015 after 20 years with Nike, and I joined Sperry Topsider, which was a brand that had seen a tremendous amount of growth, a very similar structure like Converse, one iconic product, us being the Chuck Taylor, but with Sperry was the boat shoe. And, I took a lot of the learnings from franchise management during my days at Converse and Chuck Taylor, and I applied that to the Sperry Topsider shoe. So it was, it was a big move for somebody who'd been with one corporation for about 20 years. And yeah, so I ended up in Sperry Topsider for about 2 years. Now, I don't know, I'll tell you a story about it, because this is something that lived with me, ever since. So it was pretty clear to me coming to Sperry what needed to get done, like what needed to be done in terms of franchise management, how to operate and how to run that product organization. What we forgot as a leadership team, it was a group of 5 of us that were kind of writing, I call it chapter 2 of the Sperry saga, because they'd seen some headwinds over the last couple of years. They didn't do as well, and we put together the team of 5 put together a plan that I thought was the best plan I'd ever seen. 3 months goes by, we present this to the entire organization of about 250 people, and as I'm standing up on stage and I'm watching the crowd, and it hit me right then and then on the stage. I'm like, oh my God, we have not included this entire group in this new plan of ours. And I saw half the people nodding their heads in that audience, and the other half just sat there with a big question mark over their heads. And I tell you this story because, ever since that moment, I made sure that, when you make strategic changes in an organization, you can't have everybody make decisions, but making people feel involved and accountable and utilizing their skill set and their knowledge is absolutely critical. And it's etched in my memory forever. And I just paused for a second standing up on stage. Oh my God, we did not do this right. And ever since then, this process that I've applied after that takes much longer. It's much more cumbersome, but the end result, when you wake up 3 years later, anybody can tell you the mission, the vision, the position in the company. They feel accountable for the change, and it has made all the difference in the last 10 years in my career. Utilize the entire brain power of an organization is absolutely critical, because if you don't, you'll have 50% of the organization walking around disagreeing what you're doing, and they will, quite frankly, sabotage what you're trying to do because they don't agree with it. So wow. that has been a big learning, and that's the learning that I had at Sperry Topsider for sure.
I appreciate you being perfectly on brand and being transparent and sharing that, because it's a hard one to swallow, and I will acknowledge, like, lots of head nods here. The reason that I launched Courageous was because I kept seeing, and I was a part of the problem, by the way, like being hired to tell the world a story that may or may not be true to the culture, or may not be bringing the culture along where they're co-creating it along the way. And I think that is the holy grail. Like you can't just be at the end of the conveyor belt. You need to go on the other side and see how the sauce is being made and work with the leadership team and then co-create the story with them. You can still have a plan going into it, like but bring them along. It might be slower at first, but like you got a chance at success down the line. Now, Magnus, it's pretty wild to think as we come to the here and now. I mean, those are not small brands. I mean, all household brands. And now here you are, right? This curious moment in time. I mean, you talk about right, being an entrepreneur, right? Like, and by the way, now this makes so much sense to me when you say ideas can come from anywhere, because some of the conversations that we've had, I'm like, oh yeah, Magnus is testing. He's asking me what I think on like how would I position this, or it makes total sense that is in your DNA to be like, stay curious, stay open-minded, make sure you listen. Let's see where this thing goes. Can you share a little bit about how you've been using your time, spending your time now?
Yeah. So after, going back to Tom's, after 5 years, I felt like it was time for me to leave. And I had a really good departure, and I made sure that there was a successor before I came on board, because I felt that's the Swede in me. You want to make sure that you finish the job and hand over in the proper way, right? So I felt good about that. And during maybe the last 3 years of my tenure at Tom's, I was, whether it was at night or daydreaming, I just had this. I'd spent 30 years in the footwear and apparel industry. I hadn't had a break, and I was fantasizing about time, my own time, right? And taking care of my physical health, my mental health, and I just envisioned at least a year to do absolutely nothing. That was my only plan when I left Tom. So to just taking a pretty good break. I wouldn't say I was contemplating full retirement, but I had dreamt about this for years and years, and just waking up on a Monday morning without a board meeting or without some stressful event. And I ended up actually for about a month in Sweden helping my mother do a move and stuff that I had been ignored for a long time, and I felt really good about that. I sent my kid back to school late August, early September, and I woke up one day after I'd done all the yard work and I'd surfed and I golfed, and it was still only 11:30, and I realized this dream that I've had of just having my time was probably not what I hoped it to be. I felt myself after a couple of weeks being really bored. And you're home and everybody else is at work, and playing golf with yourself 5 times a week it's not that fun. So I was kind of starting to contemplating, what is my next move? And I had several conversations with footwear and apparel brands, but after every conversation and interview, I just kind of looked myself in the mirror. I'm like, I don't think I'm ready for another footwear company, because part of being a good leader is, you can't be jaded. You have to be open to it. And I felt after every conversation, it was the same problems, the same issues. It was a little bit like Groundhog Day. And one day, early October, I have a phone call from an old colleague, of mine that we used to work together in 2001, believe it or not. 25 years ago, we worked on some really exciting project in the accessories division at Nike. We were making really cool backpacks, with kind of groundbreaking technology. And he told me he had founded a new company in the office or the furniture space. And he'd been tinkering with this for years. He brought on another person from Nike that I used to work with, and they were looking for a business leader. These guys both came from the design and the development and the innovation space. Both of them had spent quite a bit of time in the Nike Innovation Kitchen, making shoes and apparel for some of the best, Tiger Woods of the world, so to speak. So they phenomenal designers, but they really didn't have the experience in the business world. So they were looking for a CEO. And I was thinking to myself, I love furniture. Interior design is a passion of mine. It has always been, but I felt like, going from a big corporation to a startup with an office chair is probably not my next move. But I decided to go up and see them up in Portland, Oregon for a couple of days and look at the prototype they'd built. And long story short, I sat in the plane on my way back and I was thinking, about my time in Nike and the obsession about innovation. And again, innovation is thrown around a lot in corporate America today, and most of it is evolutions on existing ideas. And when I left this meeting after 2 days, like I was sitting in the airplane, I was like, this is an original idea that can actually change the way people sit. So I made the decision right then and there to kind of like, this is for me. Being in a startup, I'd never raised money in my life. I'd never been part of a startup. I'd either been with private equity or publicly traded companies. So this was a whole new journey for me. And I've been on this journey for about a year, and we're actually getting ready to launch. And we've been through fundraising. We've added investors into this, and we have something that is going to revolutionize the way people sit. And I don't want to be cryptic about it, but sometimes timing is everything, right? So you have a great product, but the timing is wrong. But as I'm looking at the industry right now, and health and wellness is, has taken a lot of different shapes and forms, and it's even become political, right? With Make America Healthy Again and like everything in this country. But if I look at what's going on in the world today, and especially in America, is people are waking up to health and wellness in a way that I haven't seen before. And I look at the grocery industry, like Whole Foods was kind of the first player to bring more awareness to what people put in their body. Erewhon is the latest example. And it's proof that people are willing to spend money on their own health. I look at gyms. I used to go to Gold's Gym and 24-Hour Fitness or whatever all they were called. But I'm starting to see the evolution of gyms into more holistic health club, a third space where you're not only going to lift weights, but it's more holistic, from mental to physical to what you eat, right? And I feel like MOOVLAB, which is the company we just founded, fits right into there. And I feel like we can bring health and wellness to the 8 to 10 hours that you sit in front of a desk. Because also, when you start reading about it, there's some taglines that you might have heard. Sitting is the new smoking, being one. But today's sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of obesity, cardiovascular disease, just to name a few, right? And our product and our innovation and our chair helps combat the sedentary lifestyle that most people live today. And I think their hybrid work has made it even worse. When you work from home, you don't go to the conference room, you don't go to the coffee room, you don't go out for lunch. You end up sitting straight 8 to 10 hours a day. And that is the worst thing that you can do, right? So we have a solution that actually makes your body and your circulation flowing while you're sitting. And it has done wonders for me in my back. And again, I'm rambling now, but this is I cannot wait to show the world what we're up to. And I truly believe this is going to help people during their office, whether they work in a music studio, they're in a medical field, or just in an office, right? This is going to be really something different. And I'm a big fan of Herman Miller. I've seen what they've done over the years. The Aeron chair by Herman Miller was groundbreaking 30 years ago. However, the last 30 years, not much has happened. People sat in a yoga ball, to try to combat sitting still, right? But we have a solution here that I feel is going to be absolutely great. And I tell you, I've been sitting in the prototype here for the last 9 months, and we've talked a lot about, the blood flowing through your body, your joints staying active and less stiff, your posture is better. The biggest unexpected consequence for me is my ability to focus sitting in this chair. And it sounds kind of like snake oil here, but through a couple of studies that we've done recently, when your blood is flowing, your brain is getting oxygen and air or blood flow, your ability to focus increases dramatically. When you sit still and you sit locked in for hours on end, your blood flow slows down and your ability to focus. And I'm a self-diagnosed ADD guy, so I find myself wandering off. I find myself doodling. But because my lower body is constantly in movement and I'm in control, micro movements or as many movements as you want, has the result has been my ability to focus for a longer period of time is a game changer.
I'll tell you that as a guy that has yet to receive the chair, that I'm saying I can give you my address, Magnus, and we can get a chair over here already.
You're first on the list, my friend.
I love hearing that. That sounds like snake oil. That's the first thing I've heard. But I'd like to be on the list. Look, anytime you partner with, when I think of Nike guys or girls, I can't help but think of performance. And so I'm excited to see how this helps me perform. The brand's called MOOVLAB. We're not working together in any capacity, folks. This isn't an ad. I just love, Magnus, how you've gone from big brand to big brand. Like you said, that story about seeing growth happen. And here you are in true entrepreneurial spirit. And maybe this is a good place to wrap. One, good for you on making the courageous leap into this new world. How scary that might be, from going from managing budgets and profits and losses to like, we need to raise money and create runway here. But I'll tell you what, the thing that's coolest for me is when I think about you, I do think about brand reinvention. And this is the first time that it feels like category reinvention. It's still reinvention. It's just the whole category is there. We need to look at the way we've done things, and here we go. This needs to be different. So bravo to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, man. How do you want to take us home? It's this conversation about courage. Give me one moment of fear that you're facing running this business that you haven't really talked about. Maybe it's uncertainty. Maybe it's the outside world. Just one fear-based thing that you're working through right now, and why you need courage.
Yeah, I think you just, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the detail, so to speak. But what we keep reminding ourselves on as a very small team here is we have something that the world needs. We have something that nobody else does. So when you stare at a cash roll forward document to say we're out of money date X, you got to remind yourself, but we have something that the world is going to want. And again, we can go on for an hour here, but I think by having a team around me, very small, we all have 30 plus experience in big brand with big successful product launches. And we're taking that into a startup. And I think for us, being scrappy has been something that we remind ourselves, because it's easy to build empires and try to do things big, but we're using our knowledge, we're making mistakes, but we're making them really quickly and we're course correcting fast. And you can only do that if you have experience, and I'm fascinated by these young kids, 25-year-olds starting their own brands and are being successful. And you obviously don't see the behind the scenes there, but if you don't, I don't think I would be successful doing this at age 25. I'll tell you that. And it's not for the faint of heart, starting a startup. And this is a very costly, capital intensive industry. We're spending millions of dollars in just production tooling on this. And I feel leading with courage is just reminding yourself and reminding the team that we have something that unique that can help our consumers. And I feel an incredible amount of responsibility, which is a different responsibility than I felt in the past. Is we're using other people's money to create this thing, and that's a responsibility that I haven't had before. So we take that very seriously. I'm back to traveling, back in the bus again, and coach and all that stuff. But I'll do that, and I'm happy doing it because I know successful is in our future. So. But it's scary sometimes. And if I go back to my 25-year-old self, I don't think I could have handled this, the pressures and the stress of one day going to FedEx and printing copies, the next day in front of a massive venture capitalist firm. And, I admire these young kids that are doing it today without the experience. And maybe being naive is the way to go, or not, and knowing enough and be dangerous, I guess.
Well, I mean, look, how I see it, maybe this is where we'll wrap. You've done plenty. And the fact that you keep waking up every morning thinking about this idea is the ultimate data point, right? Like the fact that you're still running at this, that you've got plenty of experience. You could have, like you said, you could have been bored doing brand reinvention, and maybe one day you go back to that. But for now, it's pretty cool that there's something about category reinvention, that there's a need here. And again, I'm letting people in on some of our conversations. Every time we've chatted about it, I feel like we're two detectives on a sleuth here looking for like, what is the best way to articulate why this is special to the market. So keep at it, man. It's awesome to see and hear. Also, thanks for sharing your journey. I did not know about your basketball game. That was good to know. We'll have to shoot some hoops sometime.
That is for the next podcast. We'll talk about my mediocre basketball career.
Yeah, that's on the Mediocre podcast that comes up right after this one. But all right, Magnus, thanks, man. Keep rolling, man. Good stuff.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.